All right. Well, William, Bill.
Ryan, Bernard. Is that right, Bernard?
Yeah,
That's what I thought.
that's right. I'm surprised you remembered.
Yeah. Family name, right?
Yeah. Family name.
Grandparents?
Great grandfather, Daddy B.
Yeah. I'm William after my grandpa. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. Did you use any family names with your kids?
No, not really. Not really an interesting backstory. I had a really hard time agreeing on what to name our kids because I was very picky and
Yeah.
tried to pick like more timeless names. Funny enough, the names became really trendy.
Right.
Like every kid in Noah's class is named Noah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is such an old school name. Nobody's going to name their kid this. And it's funny how those names go in cycles.
Yeah. My
Still
brother
in-
felt the same way. His name was Michael, and he was always really like, and he's about the same age as you. And I remember it was like a big thing for him when he had to
Yeah.
name his kids because he didn't want them to have the same
There's a lot of
name.
Michaels, a lot of Jonathans, a lot of Christies in my
Yeah.
generation. Very typical 80s babies.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought we could talk about how we started Press Rec and kind of how we met and what points we were at in our careers to just kind of give some context around how we started the company and how we got to know each other better as creative partners and business partners. So why don't you start? Because you do a good job of telling the very beginning of the story when we met at the coffee shop.
Yeah. So I think it was 2017, if I remember correctly. We were introduced by a mutual friend, our friend Angel. Shout out to Angel. She emailed me and she says, I have a buddy that you need to meet, and he used to be a pro rollerblader. I'm like, whoa, it sounds like somebody I would probably get along with. Since my background in action sports also. And at the time I was working on a lot of BMX freelance work for multiple brands in the industry. And I remember we were emailing back and forth and we're like, hey, let's meet up for coffee at Raleigh Times and chop it up. And that's exactly what we did. I remember we met and I remember we just instantly were like vibing because we were into the same type of stuff. We had the same exact camera packages at the time, GH5 and the original OG Mavic DJI drone. So I remember hitting it off right off the bat, and we were just kind of like chopping it up about what kind of projects we're working on. You were doing a lot of agency stuff at the time. I was still doing a lot of freelance BMX stuff and some corporate work around RTP in Raleigh. And we were like, okay, let's bring each other in on stuff. You have conversations like this all the time with people, but you don't really know if it's ever like materialize into anything. And I don't remember who hit who up first for a job, if I brought you in on one of my shoots or you brought me in on one of your shoots. But I remember,
I think it was Armstrong.
was it Armstrong? That's right.
Yeah, the Rhino spot.
You're right. You hit me up and said you needed like a BTS camera
Yeah.
for or BTS photographer for your shoot for Armstrong tires. That was a really interesting shoot.
And you saved us on that job.
What
Remember the gym? So we had a location fall through at the last minute, and you knew a lot more people locally than I did.
Yeah.
And you were able to pull some strings to get us a location super last minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember that shoot being a huge mess. And you really came through to help make that one possible. We made a lot of mistakes on that one, and it was super low budget, so we were really strapped for crew. And I just remember that one being particularly funny.
Yeah.
But did you know who I was before we met at the coffee shop?
I don't know if I had heard your name or seen you on social media at that point. Funny story that you and my brother worked together at the skate park years before.
That's
that.
what I was going to say, because my first memory or indirect interaction with you was years before, probably 5 or 6 years before, when I was working at a skate park with your brother. And I was still in school, and your brother was my boss at the summer camps where we would teach kids how to skate and ride bikes. And you had made a commercial for Skate Carry that they played on the TV in there all the time. And I remember Billy Dexter always saying that you were this big shot producer out making commercials and shooting a lot of biking. And I always thought that was really cool. And I knew you. I don't remember if I had followed you on social media or not at that point, but you had a lot of people following you at that time because you were traveling so much and filming a lot of action sports.
Yeah, it's funny. Billy Dexter, actually, I got to give him a lot of credit because he is the kid in my middle school, at my middle school lunch table that got me into BMX. He was always talking about him and his brother had these jumps and these trails. And I'm like, what are you talking about? My brother and I always had clunker BMX bikes from Walmart, and we would jump them. My parents property and just like break them. And I was just didn't know that there was like real bikes and like real BMXers out there. But I think it was 6th or 7th grade. I sat at the lunch table with Billy and him, and my other buddy Jason would always talk about BMX. I'm like, these guys seem cool. I want to go hang out at their house after school one day. My mom took me over there one day, and I just opened a whole new world of fun for me.
It's so like such a random person to connect to get us to where we are. Like I never would have expected that kind of connection from what I was doing at Skate Carry. And at the time I was so inexperienced and not doing video professionally. I was like PAing on jobs and doing stuff, but I was like 20.
Yep.
So it wasn't like I was, DPing jobs at that point. This was, many years before, but it was funny. And the thought at the time to me, so for context, in action sports, the industries are sort of separated by sport. So BMX, skateboarding, and inline. Inline and scooter, I would say, are the lower end of that. There's not much industry. There's no money to be made. And so the thought of somebody professionally filming action sports athletes was like this really foreign idea to me because there was no money in the industry that I was really experienced in, which was inline. So I was traveling and I had sponsors and they would pay for me to like enter comps or they would like send me product. But I would make videos of myself skating or of my friends or other guys who were sponsored. I wouldn't get paid for any of that stuff. I didn't realize that there were people like making a living doing this and that's what you were living at the time. And so that was really cool to me. And so when Angel, I reached out to Angel when I was working at a creative agency. So I was part of like a national creative agency at this large company. And part of my job at that company was to connect with local freelancers so that when I did get jobs that were either in market or that we had to travel to, that I had a network to pull from. And I had, the guys who I had already regularly been using on jobs. But I reached out to Angel because I was like working with her on something else at the time. She had hired me to help do some graphics or something for her. And for some show she was working on, I forget what it was. I just remember it was some motion graphics thing, which is not my forte, but helped her do it. And she said, I just had coffee with this guy you really should meet. I think you guys would hit it off. And she was totally right. It was really funny. The way, like, again, another person that I never would have expected to connect the dots to something like this. So just kind of funny.
That's like kind of the power of remembering to like network with who's in your local community. The filmmaking community here in Raleigh, Durham isn't huge. So you rub shoulders with a lot of people, you meet a lot of people. And I think that's really important, especially for younger filmmakers, just to get out there and network, not be scared to like hit people up, email them. Even if you get rejected, just know that they need to know that you're on their radar or you're in town and you're trying to make cool stuff. That's pretty important.
Yeah.
Taking it back to my middle school days, like when I got into BMX, I was sitting at the lunch table with Billy, Dexter, and my other buddy Jason Landell, and they were always talking about BMX and going to Lions Park to go race, and I was just like, man, this sounds like such a cool world. I never had a nice bike or anything, but I think I was 14 when I got my first BMX bike, and there weren't any riders in our town, at our high school or middle school. There was like 3 or 4 of us, so it was very small. That was not a cool thing at my school. It was more traditional sports. Baseball, basketball, football was everything. But I got along really good with the BMXers and a handful of skaters, and in my senior year of high school, I got access to the broadcasting lab where they had cameras and editing machines. Back then it was VCR to VCR, dubbing tapes back and forth. So I learned how to use that equipment sometime in my junior year of high school with a couple other students that were a little bit older than me that were deep in the editing classes. And then my senior year, I got in the editing lab after school every day to make a BMX and skate video with some of my skater friends at school. And that's really when it clicked for me. Like, my passion for BMX kind of translated into watching a lot of bike videos growing up. It was all VHS back then, hard to get your hands on physical tapes. But I started watching it and I was like, man, this is so cool. It like combines like BMX, the sport I love so much, and like the video filmmaking side of it. So I really wanted to learn the basics of camera so I could try to make my own films with my friends, which I did over time. But that whole learning process when you're still in high school and you learn how to create something for another passion you're interested in, like the bike, mixing the bikes and the cameras together really kind of like hit it off for me. And then just starting to travel and meeting BMXers outside of our local town, other riders that come to our town, your network just starts sprawling and you meet more and more people. Eventually some of my good friends became paid pros that needed footage for video. So I was right there, the guy at the trails that already had a camera, and I was like submitting footage to videos in like 97, 98. And that's really how I got my first start and having opportunities to work in the BMX industry.
And some of those people that you met are sending us work now as Press Rec, right?
Yeah.
Like we're still, like you're still reaping the benefits of those connections from really early in your career. And the same goes for me, like people that I met years ago, either at agencies that have helped us grow the company or have made connections to help us get jobs, whatever it may be. Like you never know when you meet somebody, and you have to have a lot of conversations in our industry with people. And like you said, sometimes you don't know if they're going to go anywhere or if they are. And in our case, it did. So I'm going to jump forward a bit, and we talked a little bit about the first job, which was Armstrong, and how much of a mess that job was. But after we met at the coffee shop, we started hiring each other for gigs. And I believe that Armstrong was the first one that we worked on together. And then we both started kind of hiring each other. So I was working at an agency, and then I also had kind of my freelance work on the side. You had your own LLC and your own company, your own thing that you were doing, and you had your own book of business and customers. And occasionally you would need help with whatever it was, various things. And what I was focusing on at the agency was branded content and more strategic video content beyond the traditional explainer type corporate work, which was that was a lot of what was in this market at that time. This is like late 2017, early 2018, and we're working on a lot of like the bread and butter of that time was explainer videos. Like, what does your company do? They all kind of looked and sounded the same. And few people were like willing to take risks. Traditional advertisers were just sort of starting to dip their toes into internet advertising and content marketing, especially in this market. It wasn't super prevalent. You would see that stuff nationally, but not so much here. We're in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so part of my job at that agency was to try and grow that kind of business and pitch those ideas to traditional advertisers, small business and big business, here in the park and everywhere, right? I kind of traveled all over. I did jobs in New York and Georgia and Florida, here in North Carolina, and helped put those campaigns together. And one of the big ones that landed that we worked on extensively together was the Driven campaign. So we started doing Driven, and this would have been like mid 2018, something like that. And Driven was paid for by an auto dealer. And the idea was like, what drives you? And it was a bunch of story pieces about things that people were passionate about. And it ranged from, we did a video about a skate park, about a mountain biker, about a dance studio, about an animal chiropractor, a band, everything in between. We did 15 total over 2 years of those story pieces, and we were on the road quite a bit together during that time. So in the year leading up to it, we had worked together, maybe once a month or something like that. And then all of a sudden we were like spending, 5-6 days together on the road all the time and shooting this stuff. And one thing that I remember vividly about this was sort of the creative kind of collaboration that happened and the synergies that we were finding while we were out at that time, and realizing how much overlap from action sports there was in the documentary work, and how the skills that we had from our years shooting and producing action sports content translated to this real world storytelling with a little more heart to it than maybe action sports content had. And I just remember that time, like us trading we shot those with one camera. So it was a lot of like handing the camera back and forth, a lot of working together to come up with shots. And we were sort of writing those like as we were shooting them, in a sense. Like we knew what the story was. Like we knew we were going to go film an animal chiropractor, somebody who works with animals to adjust their back. But like, what was the deeper story? We had to figure that out while we were doing it. And I just remember feeling really good about that sort of partnership.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing me into that Driven campaign. That was a lot of fun to work on. I'll never forget too, you had like an agency budget, so you're like, guess what, man, we get to rent Red cameras for this one. And that, I'd shot with Reds before, but only a handful of times, and it was kind of like a big luxury at the time to have like a real like rental budget. So getting to use like fancier cameras than we're normally using to make something really nice and pretty was a lot of fun. And I remember you kind of like briefed me on what all the creative was ahead of time, so I had a little bit of time to like marinate on it and like help you with any ideas on set as we were shooting. You know, we didn't have like strict storyboards. I know we had like a loose list of like, we knew what our interview questions were, but we showed up when we showed up, but we didn't really have like a hard shot list. It was like, let's go in and be creative, find the shots, tell the story, make something nice. And it was cool too, because we both have such like similar skill set with like directing and shooting. So it was fun just like letting you go direct and shoot something, and then I say, well, let me hold the camera and try. I have an idea. I don't know if this will work, but that creative synergy that you mentioned was really fun to experiment and see how your brain works and my brain works, and how we can like fuse it together to try to make something better than we could make individually.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that that's like not traditional for somebody in our field. So for those who maybe aren't working in our field, usually there's, you know, on a set, everyone has like a really strict role in what they're going to do. And oftentimes it'll be like the director who is just telling everybody what to do, but has the creative vision for the project and oversees that everybody makes the thing. And then a director of photography who would be the person either on the camera or telling the camera operator what to do. And we kind of traded that back and forth. We had not to discredit the rest of the people involved in the project, we had a whole team of people helping us produce that stuff, put it together, give us creative direction, help us with editing, everything along the way. But one of the biggest things that I learned during that project was to trust the people around me more, right? We both came from one-man bands, smaller corporate budgets, and it was really nice to be able to trust everybody to stay in their lanes but overlap when you needed them to, right? Everybody involved, I feel like, did that. And when we needed help in pre-production, we had people that were helping us. And sometimes the editor would give notes for like things that we would use for the next stories that we were shooting. And traditionally, people wouldn't do that. And I don't know if that was just by nature, it was like, you know, lucky, all of the people that were a part of that project, or if it was this sort of relaxed culture that we kind of fostered with everybody. I don't know. But it was really cool to kind of watch that sort of foster and grow. And I think that it made the project better having all of those people involved. And we would spend all this time together on the road. We would go out to eat and spend time in the evenings saying, like, how can we make this a thing? Because we're having so much fun doing it. And the videos were performing well. The advertiser was really happy. Like, things were going good. How could we adopt this? So like a lot of what our conversations were during that time was like, how do we take this model to market and convince people that authentic, story-driven content can help move the needle for brands? That was at the core of what we were thinking of when we were starting, like the early ideas of what Press Rec could be, right? At the agency, I was working with the budgets. I knew how much we were spending. I knew roughly like what the numbers were going to look like, and the money all made sense because this agency, like I said, was a big national company. They knew what they were doing, and they knew how to sell the stuff, right? And you and I are not salesmen. We're video guys, and that's what we love. And so that was a big hurdle to try and wrap our heads around. But we were already using each other on like pretty much every job that I was going on. I was hiring you, and most of the jobs you were going on, you were hiring me for. So it kind of got to a point where the writing was on the wall for me at the agency, and I knew that I was like ready for what was next. And we were talking all the time and just brainstorming, right? Creative thinking around how do we turn this into a business? And that's kind of what led to like the early days of Press Rec, was those conversations. How do we take this model? How much can we charge per video? Who can we get that would be interested in this type of content? And that was January of 2020. And guess what happened next, right?
Right before the world stopped.
Right before the world stopped, and budgets stopped, and everything came to a screeching halt. But we had already sort of soft launched what was going to become Press Rec at that time. Like, I think January was when we decided on the name, and I remember buying the domain. After we met at the same coffee shop that we had first met at. We sat down. Remember that?
Yep.
We went to Raleigh Times for like 3 hours. And we were both like, do we really need a 3-hour meeting? I was like, let's sit down and like really work through this because I think that we're onto something here. And we bought the domain name right then. And we started contacting people while we were there in that coffee shop. People who were close connections with me at the agency or had left and moved on to other things. But also our own book of business and our own network to say like, hey, here's what we want to do. How can we do this with your help? Or do you work for a company that might need a service like this? Do you know somebody who we should talk to and have conversations with? So again, that was January, and then the world stopped, right? And I knew that my days were numbered where I was ready for the next thing, and we were actively setting up what that was going to become. But nobody was doing anything in 2020. So really that gave us a long time to have a lot of calls with different people all over the country and say, here's what we want to do. This is the target customer. This is what they look like. This is how much revenue the companies probably generate. This is the type of ethos that they maybe have as a brand, right? And it really helped us kind of define that, but also develop a better working relationship between the two of us beyond just like freelancers who hire each other, right? It was like we need to have a meeting every week to like decide who's going to do what of each thing, right? Structures that weren't in place for us at that time, we kind of really honed in and developed during COVID.
Yeah, it was interesting too because we couldn't go film anything in person with any of our clients. We were stuck recording Zoom calls there for a while, and that was really got old fast, but it actually kind of gave us a little bit of time to build out what our structure could be when we come out of this, right? When COVID was over, like how are we going to hit the ground running and get back into production quickly? So you're right, we spent a lot of time networking, reaching out to everybody we knew in both of our networks, like, hey, we're ready. As soon as we get through this, we're ready to shoot some cool stuff. And it took a while to get things to hit, but it hit. We stayed persistent.
Worked, you know? I mean, it struck a chord. The authenticity of the brand that we were building struck a chord with people, and it helped get us to where we are now, right? We wouldn't have this company and this great team and all of this stuff if it weren't for those early customers who were, you know, willing and ready to sign on and to jump on board with this. And, you know, we owe a lot to them, and it's been really fun. Getting to experiment and build the brand in a way that we're both happy with, but also sort of play on what that is, right? Like creatively, we set these boundaries for ourselves around storytelling and authenticity, and then it's like pushing that envelope with each job a little bit more and a little bit more that is interesting to me, and our growth, you know, creatively as a team has benefited immensely from that.
I agree. And like going back to Driven for a minute, we might need to like insert this earlier. But so with Driven, the other cool part was we weren't micromanaged on that project. You showed up as the director. We didn't have some executive producer from your agency there. So there's a lot of creative freedom on those sets to where yourself, myself, we could pass the camera back and forth freely and think outside the box, do non-traditional filmmaking on a corporate set. We also had Pat, our buddy Pat Dunnigan, who was like our grip swing lighting expert, and he was also a DP. So Pat, here, go shoot out some B-roll, make this look cool. So I think between all of our brains, we were able to capture some beautiful shots that not one of us could have done individually, but using all of that creative collaboration that you don't normally get to experiment with on like a real video set. We were just like, we were in charge, so we could run it how we wanted to. And I thank you for giving us all the creative freedom for like a project like that. We got to make something special that I think we're all really proud of. Shout out to Denise too. She was a great producer. Denise was great, kind of helping us on the organizational production side, and she edited some stuff and helped with some of the creative writing, which was a big help that you and I had that smart kind of her angle with how she wanted to tell these stories. So that was a lot of fun.
There was some magic there with that whole team, right? Everybody who was involved from beginning to end helped create something that was unique and was special. And I think what I wanted to figure out and what our conversations were around was like, how do we catch that like magic in a bottle and then give it to all of our customers? And I still think that we're trying to figure out exactly what that is and what that means, but we have really good parameters and a strong foundation around creatively what that needs to look like to be successful now.
Yeah.
In a way that I am happy with, and it has produced some really great pieces on the back end using some of that same team from Driven on projects that we're working on even today to help us make better and better stuff for our customers now and into the future. And it's been a great ride, and I'm so thankful for everybody who's helped us all along the way, and I can't wait for what's to come next.
Same. I'm very grateful that we have like access to such a powerful crew, our local freelancers. We have a great network of people we can call on for almost any weird situation we get into, right? We might have a really obscure type of shoot where we don't know how we're going to do it, and then we have like all these people at our disposal in the Rolodex that can help guide us when we need help. So just the power of networking and meeting everybody in your local network to help you achieve your goals with these types of productions is extremely valuable.
You never know where it's going to take you.